Sometimes the most extraordinary acts of generosity come from those who have the least to give. A single father working double shifts, a pregnant woman shivering in the rain outside a convenience store, and one worn winter coat that would reveal a secret worth billions. He thought he was just helping a stranger get through a cold night. She thought no one would ever show her kindness without knowing who she really was. But when Tyler Thorne gave his only coat to a woman he'd never met, he had no idea he was about to discover that the most powerful person in the city had been hiding in plain sight, testing whether genuine compassion still existed in the world. One moment of pure human decency. 2 lives forever changed. A fortune that paled in comparison to what they'd find in each other. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's Corner store cast harsh shadows across the rain-soaked pavement, turning puddles into mirrors that reflected a world Tyler Thorne barely recognized anymore. 3 months. Behind on rent, 2 jobs that still wasn't enough, and one 8-year-old daughter who deserved so much better than the life he was struggling to provide. But Tyler had learned something his own father never taught him. Sometimes being a good man means doing the right thing, even when you have nothing left to give. Tonight would test that belief in ways he never imagined. The October rain fell like cold judgment across the industrial district of Millbrook, a mid-sized city where dreams came to die quietly in factory parking lots and all-night diners. Tyler pulled his threadbare coat tighter as he stepped out of Murphy's, a bag of discount groceries in one hand and his last $5 bill crumpled in his pocket. The night shift at Brookstone Manufacturing had ended an hour ago, but he'd stopped to grab milk and bread for his daughter Emma's breakfast. She was staying with Mrs. Patterson next door tonight again, while he worked his second job cleaning offices downtown. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on his shoulders like a physical thing. At 32, Tyler felt decades older, weathered by the relentless grind of single parenthood and financial survival. His ex-wife Rachel had left 2 years ago, taking nothing but her suitcase and a note that said she couldn't handle the responsibility anymore. She'd walked away from their marriage, their daughter, their life together, leaving Tyler to pick up pieces he was still trying to fit back together. But despite everything, the unpaid bills stacked on his kitchen counter, the growing hole in his work boots, the way Emma's eyes sometimes looked too old for her 8 years, Tyler had never lost his fundamental belief in doing right by people. His grandfather had taught him that kindness wasn't a luxury for those who could afford it. It was a necessity for those who understood what it meant to need help. As he walked toward his 15-year-old Honda Civic, keys jingling in the cold air, Tyler noticed something that made him stop. Across the street, barely visible under the broken streetlight outside the closed laundromat, a figure sat hunched on a bus stop bench. The person was clearly soaked through, shoulders trembling, with no protection from the steadily falling rain that had been pounding Millbrook for the past 3 hours. Tyler paused at his car door, groceries growing heavy in his grip. His rational mind cataloged all the reasons to keep walking. He was already late for his cleaning shift. Emma would be wondering when he'd be home to read her a bedtime story, and he could barely take care of his own problems, let alone a stranger's. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to drive away, and let someone else deal with whatever situation was unfolding across the street. But Tyler Thorne had never been particularly good at doing the smart thing when it came to other people's pain. He set the groceries on the roof of his car and squinted through the rain. The figure wasn't moving much, just sitting there getting drenched, and something about the stillness made Tyler's chest tighten with concern. In this part of town, at this time of night, that could mean anything from someone who'd missed the last bus to someone in serious trouble. Either way, no one deserved to sit alone in a downpour. Tyler locked his car and jogged across the empty street, rain immediately soaking through his work shirt. As he got closer, he could make out more details. It was a woman, probably in her late 20s, with long dark hair plastered to her face and clothes that looked expensive, but were now completely ruined by the weather. She was wrapped around herself protectively, and there was something about her posture vulnerable but dignified that reminded him painfully of Emma when she was trying not to cry. "Ma'am?" He called out gently as he approached, keeping his voice low so as not to startle her. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up, and Tyler felt his breath catch. Even through the rain and obvious distress, he could see she was beautiful, not in the polished, untouchable way of magazine covers, but in the raw, human way of someone whose guard was completely down. Her eyes were large and dark, filled with a mixture of wariness and something that looked like relief at hearing another human voice. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice betrayed her. It was shaky, whether from cold or emotion or both, and she was clearly anything but fine. Tyler looked around at the deserted street, then back at her. She was soaked to the skin, had no umbrella, no jacket, and was sitting at a bus stop where the last bus had run 2 hours ago. The nearest shelter was 6 blocks away, and the rain showed no signs of stopping. "Look, I don't want to intrude," he said, crouching down slightly so they were at eye level, "but you're getting hypothermia sitting out here. There's a 24-hour diner about 3 blocks down, or I could call someone for you." She shook her head quickly. "No calls, please." Something in her tone, desperate but trying to maintain control, told Tyler there was more to this story than someone who'd simply gotten caught in bad weather. But he'd learned from his own struggles that sometimes people needed help without needing to explain why. "Okay," he said simply. "No calls." They sat in silence for a moment, the rain drumming against the metal roof of the bus stop shelter, which was providing exactly zero protection from the wind-driven precipitation. Tyler watched her shiver and made a decision that his rational mind immediately protested. He shrugged out of his coat. The coat was nothing special, a faded navy blue work jacket he'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago, with frayed cuffs and a small tear near the left elbow that he kept meaning to sew up. It was the only real winter protection he owned, and with November approaching, he'd need it for the next 6 months of Millbrook's harsh climate. But looking at the woman's blue-tinged lips and the way her whole body shook with each gust of wind, Tyler knew he couldn't walk away and leave her exposed to the elements. "Here," he said, holding out the jacket. "You need this more than I do." She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand what kind of trick this might be. In her experience, strangers didn't offer help without wanting something in return, especially not strangers who clearly had little to spare. "I can't take your coat," she said. "You'll freeze." Tyler smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed in weeks. "I've got a car with heat waiting right across the street. And I'm guessing you don't." The woman looked around at the empty street, then back at the offered jacket. Her resistance was crumbling under the simple reality that she was cold, wet, and had nowhere else to go. Slowly, she reached out and took the coat, pulling it around her shoulders like armor against the world. "Thank you," she whispered, and Tyler could hear the tears she was holding back. "What's your name?" he asked, settling onto the bench beside her but leaving respectful distance between them. She hesitated. "Charlotte. I'm Tyler." He gestured toward the deserted intersection. "You live around here, Charlotte?" Another pause. "Not exactly." Tyler nodded, recognizing the evasion and choosing not to push. The industrial district wasn't exactly a neighborhood where people lived by choice. Most of the buildings were warehouses, auto repair shops, and small manufacturing plants that had seen better decades. The few residential areas nearby were low income housing and apartment complexes where people landed when life had knocked them down a few pegs. The rain continued its relentless assault, turning the streets into rivers and the air into a cold mist that seemed to seep into everything. Streetlights created yellow pools of illumination that only emphasized how alone they were in this corner of the city. The bus stop where they sat was a sorry excuse for shelter, just a metal frame with a partial roof that did nothing to block the wind. The advertising poster inside the frame was so faded and water damaged that Tyler couldn't even make out what product it was supposed to be selling. This part of Millbrook told the story of a city that had once thrived on manufacturing, jobs and middle-class dreams, but those days were long gone. Empty storefronts lined the main drag, their for-lease signs as permanent as the potholes in the cracked asphalt. The few businesses that survived operated on thin margins and hope. Murphy's Corner Store with its flickering neon sign, Tony's all-night diner where coffee cost $1 and the pie was always stale, and a handful of auto repair shops that stayed afloat fixing the increasingly old cars of people who couldn't afford anything better. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tyler knew this landscape intimately. He'd grown up 3 neighborhoods over, in a house his parents had lost to foreclosure when he was 17. He'd watched Millbrook slowly hollow out as factories closed and jobs disappeared, leaving behind a population of people who were either too stubborn, too poor, or too broken to leave. He fell into all 3 categories, but tonight, sitting in the rain next to a pregnant woman whose story he didn't know, Tyler felt something he hadn't experienced in months: purpose beyond survival. For the past 2 years, every decision he'd made had been about keeping Emma fed, housed, and safe. Noble goals, but they'd narrowed his world to a tunnel of work, worry, and exhaustion. Helping Charlotte, this simple act of offering his coat to someone who needed it more, reminded him of who he used to be before life had beaten him down to the basics. Charlotte pulled his jacket tighter around herself, and Tyler noticed her hand instinctively move to her stomach in a protective gesture. She was definitely pregnant, probably 5 or 6 months along based on the subtle roundness he could see even through her loose clothing. The protective way she held herself told him this pregnancy was wanted, treasured, which made her current situation even more concerning. "How long have you been sitting out here?" he asked gently. "A few hours," she admitted. "I was waiting for someone was supposed to pick me up. But plans changed." Tyler heard the careful neutrality in her voice, the way someone sounds when they're editing their story in real time. He'd done plenty of that himself, explaining to Emma why mommy wasn't coming back, telling his boss why he needed to leave early for a parent-teacher conference, crafting versions of truth that protected people from harder realities. "Your phone die?" he asked, pulling out his own ancient flip phone. "You can use mine if you need to call someone." Charlotte looked at the outdated device with something that might have been amusement if the circumstances had been different. "Thank you, but no. I don't really have anyone to call right now." The loneliness in that statement hit Tyler like a physical blow. He knew exactly what it felt like to be stranded with no one to turn to have a contact list full of numbers that wouldn't help when you really needed them. It was the particular isolation of people who had fallen through society's safety nets, or who had never had safety nets to begin with. A police cruiser drove slowly past, its headlights sweeping across them briefly before continuing down the street. Tyler felt Charlotte tense beside him, pulling the hood of his jacket up to shadow her face. Interesting reaction, he thought, but didn't comment. Everyone had their reasons for avoiding attention from law enforcement, and most of those reasons weren't necessarily criminal. The rain began to ease slightly, shifting from a downpour to a steady drizzle that was somehow even more depressing. It was the kind of weather that made everything look gray and hopeless, that seeped into your bones and your mood until you forgot what sunshine felt like. Tyler checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. His cleaning shift had officially started 17 minutes ago, and his supervisor, Mr. Henderson, was already looking for excuses to cut Tyler's hours. But he couldn't leave Charlotte sitting here alone, pregnant and vulnerable, in a neighborhood where bad things happen to people after midnight. Tyler Thorne had never planned to become a cautionary tale about good men getting dealt bad hands. But life had a way of writing stories that no one would choose for themselves. 32 years old, 6 feet tall with calloused hands and eyes that held more kindness than his circumstances probably warranted, Tyler carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who refused to let hardship turn him bitter. He'd grown up in Millbrook, believing in the promises adults make to young people: work hard, stay honest, treat people right, and life will reward you accordingly. His grandfather, a man who'd built his own construction business from nothing, had been Tyler's hero and moral compass. "Son," the old man used to say while teaching Tyler to use power tools in his garage workshop, "the measure of a man isn't what he has, it's what he gives when he doesn't have much to give." Those words had shaped Tyler's entire worldview, even when following them made his life exponentially harder. He'd married Rachel when they were both 23, young and stupid, and absolutely certain their love could overcome anything the world threw at them. Tyler had been working construction then. Good steady work that paid enough for a small apartment, and dreams of something bigger. When Emma was born 5 years later, he'd felt like the richest man alive, holding his daughter in the hospital room, watching Rachel smile with exhausted joy, believing they were building something beautiful together. The cracks started small, the way they always do. Rachel complained that Tyler worked too much, then complained that he didn't make enough money. She started talking about her friends whose husbands had real careers, instead of jobs that left them dirty and tired at the end of each day. When the construction company Tyler worked for went under during the recession, those cracks became fault lines. Tyler spent 8 months unemployed, sending out resumes for jobs that didn't exist and watching their savings evaporate. He took whatever work he could find: landscaping, moving furniture, painting houses, but it wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle Rachel had envisioned for their family. The woman who'd once loved his work ethic began to see it as evidence of his failure to provide properly. The day Rachel left, Emma had been at school, and Tyler had been getting ready for another job interview, this one for a position at Brookstone Manufacturing that paid half what he'd made in construction. He'd come home to find a note on the kitchen table and half their belongings gone. "I can't do this anymore," the letter read. "I need more than you can give me. Emma deserves better than this." The cruel irony was that Rachel had been right about one thing: Emma did deserve better. But her solution, abandoning their daughter to chase some fantasy of an easier life, had left Tyler to figure out how to be both mother and father to an 8-year-old who couldn't understand why mommy had stopped loving them. For 2 years, Tyler had been rebuilding their life piece by piece. The job at Brookstone wasn't glamorous. He operated machinery that packaged industrial supplies, working third shift because it paid $1 more per hour, but it was steady. The cleaning job he'd picked up on weekends helped cover Emma's after-school care and the occasional emergency expense that always seemed to come at the worst possible time. Their apartment was small, a 2-bedroom unit in a complex that had been nice once but now catered to single parents and seniors on fixed incomes. Tyler had painted Emma's room yellow because she'd said it looked like sunshine, and he'd hung her artwork on every available wall space to make the place feel like home instead of just somewhere they were temporarily landing. Emma was the bright spot in Tyler's universe, a precocious 8-year-old with her father's kind heart and her mother's sharp intelligence. She'd inherited Tyler's brown eyes and stubborn streak, but she had a resilience that amazed him daily. She adapted to their new reality with the flexibility of someone too young to fully understand what they'd lost, but old enough to know that Daddy was doing his best. Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor, had become an unexpected blessing. A retired teacher who'd never had children of her own. She'd taken Emma under her wing with a fierceness that sometimes brought tears to Tyler's eyes. She refused his offers of payment for babysitting, claiming that Emma's company was payment enough. "That little girl has been reading to me every evening," she'd tell Tyler. "She's helping me more than I'm helping her." The three of them had formed an unlikely family unit: Tyler, Emma, and Mrs. Patterson, bound together by necessity, but sustained by genuine affection. It wasn't the life Tyler had planned, but it was good in ways that surprised him. Emma was thriving in school. Mrs. Patterson had someone to fuss over, and Tyler had learned that love doesn't require a perfect nuclear family structure to flourish. But the financial pressure was relentless. Tyler's paychecks covered their basic needs with almost nothing left over. He shopped at thrift stores and clipped coupons with the dedication of someone for whom $5 could mean the difference between paying the electric bill on time or getting a shut-off notice. He'd learned to repair their old appliances himself, to cut Emma's hair in their bathroom, to make one tank of gas last a full week by combining every possible errand into single trips. The coat he'd just given to Charlotte represented a week's worth of lunch money. But sitting next to her now, watching her warm up inside the worn fabric, Tyler felt the same satisfaction he'd experienced the first time Emma had successfully ridden her bike without training wheels. Some things mattered more than personal comfort. Tyler's phone buzzed with a text message from his cleaning supervisor. "Where are you? Building needs to be done by 6 a.m. He looked at Charlotte, still shivering despite the coat, then typed back, "Family emergency. We'll make up hours tomorrow." Tomorrow. It wasn't technically a lie. Charlotte might not be family in the traditional sense, but Tyler had learned that families could be chosen as well as born. And right now, this pregnant woman sitting alone in the rain needed someone to choose her, even if just for one night. "You work late," Charlotte observed, having seen him check his phone. "2 jobs. Tyler said with a shrug that suggested this was normal rather than necessary. "Keeps life interesting." She studied his profile in the dim light, taking in the tired lines around his eyes and the way his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "What kind of work?" "Manufacturing during the week, cleaning offices on weekends. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills." Tyler paused, then added with the first hint of pride he'd shown, "I've got a daughter. Everything I do is for her." Charlotte felt something twist in her chest at the simple honesty of that statement. Here was a man who was clearly struggling, who'd just given away his only coat to a stranger, talking about his responsibilities with the kind of quiet dedication she'd rarely encountered in her world of boardrooms and power plays. "How old is she?" Charlotte asked softly. 8. Her name's Emma." Tyler's whole demeanor changed when he talked about his daughter. His voice grew warmer, his posture straightened slightly. "She's the smartest kid I know. Wants to be a veterinarian. When she grows up, which means I need to start saving for college about 15 years ago." He laughed, but Charlotte could hear the underlying worry. She knew enough about the economics of single parenthood to understand the impossible mathematics Tyler was trying to solve: how to provide stability, education, and opportunity for his daughter on wages that probably barely covered their basic survival. "She's lucky to have you," Charlotte said, and meant it completely. Tyler looked at her with surprise, as if the idea that he might be enough for Emma was a foreign concept. "I just try to do right by her. Some days I feel like I'm failing, but she doesn't seem to notice." "Trust me," Charlotte said, her hand moving unconsciously to her own stomach. "Kids notice love more than they notice money." There was something in her tone, a wistfulness maybe, or a longing, that made Tyler look at her more closely. Charlotte had the bearing of someone educated, the speech patterns of someone who'd grown up with advantages, but she was sitting alone in the rain in one of Millbrook's roughest neighborhoods at midnight. The pieces didn't fit together in any obvious way. "What about you?" Tyler asked gently. "Family waiting for you somewhere?" Charlotte's expression closed off slightly. "It's complicated." Tyler nodded, recognizing another person carrying secrets that were too heavy to share with strangers. He'd learned not to push when people put up walls sometimes, Those walls were the only thing holding someone together. A delivery truck rumbled past, its headlights illuminating the rain-soaked street, before disappearing around the corner toward the industrial complex. The sound of its engine faded into the distance, leaving them alone again with the steady rhythm of rainfall and the occasional hiss of tires on wet pavement. Tyler checked his watch again. 12:15 a.m. His cleaning shift was now 45 minutes behind schedule, which meant he'd have to work faster and skip his usual dinner break to finish on time. But looking at Charlotte, still pale but warming up gradually in his coat, he knew he'd made the right choice. "You hungry?" he asked. "That diner down the street isn't much, but they're open all night and the coffee's hot." Charlotte hesitated, clearly torn between accepting more help and maintaining whatever independence she was trying to preserve. Tyler recognized the internal struggle. He'd been there himself, learning to accept kindness from Mrs. Patterson without feeling like he was failing as a father. "My treat," he added quickly, sensing her hesitation. "I was going to grab something anyway." It was a lie. Tyler had packed a sandwich for his break and couldn't afford to eat out. But something about Charlotte's situation made him want to offer whatever comfort he could. Maybe it was the protective way she held her stomach, or the exhausted sadness in her eyes, or simply the fact that helping her felt like the first meaningful thing he'd done in months. Charlotte looked at him for a long moment, the stranger who'd given her his coat and was now offering to buy her food, without asking for anything in return. In her world, every gesture came with strings attached. Every kindness was an investment in future favors. But Tyler's offer felt different, clean, uncomplicated, genuinely caring. "Okay," she said quietly. "Thank you." Tony's all-night diner squatted on the corner of Industrial and Fifth, like a fluorescent-lit island in an ocean of urban decay. The red vinyl booths had been repaired with duct tape so many times they looked like abstract art projects, and the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, which made it popular with night shift workers, insomniacs, and people who had nowhere else to go at ungodly hours. Tyler held the door open for Charlotte, noting how she paused to scan the interior before entering, a habit he recognized from his own years of being careful, of always knowing where the exits were and who else was in the room. The diner was nearly empty, except for a truck driver reading a paperback novel at the counter and an elderly woman nursing a cup of tea while working a crossword puzzle. They chose a booth near the back, Charlotte sliding in first and pulling Tyler's coat tighter around herself. Under the harsh diner lighting, Tyler could see her more clearly, and what he saw made his protective instincts flare even stronger. She was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that came with a price, the sort that made men assume things and women feel threatened. Her clothes, though soaked and wrinkled, were obviously expensive. The watch on her wrist was understated, but looked like it cost more than Tyler made in 6 months. Most telling of all, she moved with the unconscious confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room, but right now she was trying to make herself invisible. It was a contradiction that fascinated and worried Tyler in equal measure. "Coffee?" asked Dolores, the night shift waitress who'd been working at Tony's since before Tyler was born. She was a tough woman with kind eyes who treated everyone the same regardless of their ability to tip. "Please," Tyler said. "And could we get a couple menus?" Charlotte wrapped her hands around the steaming mug Dolores poured, inhaling the rich aroma like it was medicine. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now that she was warming up. "You look like you've had a rough night, honey," Dolores observed with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every variety of human crisis. "You need anything special?" "We've got soup, sandwiches, pie." "Soup sounds perfect," Charlotte said. "Whatever you recommend." "Chicken noodle," Dolores said decisively. "Made it fresh this afternoon. And you, Tyler? The usual?" Tyler realized that Dolores knew him, which meant he'd been here more often than he'd thought. Probably stopping for coffee during those long nights when he couldn't sleep. When worry about Emma and money and the future kept him pacing the floors of their small apartment. "Just coffee tonight, Dolores. Thanks." The waitress gave him a look. That suggested she wasn't fooled by his casual tone. "How about some of that soup for you too? On the house we made too much anyway." Tyler started to protest, but Dolores was already walking away with the authority of someone who'd been feeding people for 40 years and wasn't about to start taking arguments from customers who needed a good meal. "She's sweet," Charlotte observed, watching the older woman disappear into the kitchen. "Dolores has been keeping this neighborhood fed since before I was born," Tyler said. "My grandfather used to bring me here when I was little. She always remembered how I liked my hot chocolate." "Your grandfather raised you?" Tyler nodded. "After my parents died in a car accident when I was 7. Grandpa Joe was a good man, taught me everything important about being human." Charlotte felt a familiar pang at hearing about loving family relationships. She'd grown up with every material advantage, but had never experienced the kind of unconditional love Tyler described so casually. "I'm sorry about your parents," she said softly. "It was a long time ago," Tyler replied, though his eyes held the particular sadness of someone who'd learned too young that life could change in an instant. "Grandpa Joe made sure I knew they'd be proud of the man I became. Some days I wonder if that's true, but I try to live like it is." Dolores returned with 2 bowls of soup that smelled like comfort and safety. Charlotte realized she hadn't eaten anything substantial in nearly 12 hours, too nervous and sick to her stomach to face food earlier in the day. Now surrounded by the simple normalcy of the diner, she discovered she was ravenous. Tyler watched her eat with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years making sure his daughter got enough nutrition. Charlotte noticed his scrutiny and slowed down, suddenly self-conscious. "Sorry," she said. "I guess I was hungrier than I thought." "Don't apologize for eating," Tyler said gently. "Especially in your condition. You're eating for 2 now." The casual reference to her pregnancy made Charlotte's hand move protectively to her stomach again. 6 months, she said, though Tyler hadn't asked. It's a girl. It's a girl." Tyler's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Girls are the best. They'll wrap you around their little finger before they can even walk, but they'll also be your biggest champions for life. Emma still tells people I'm the strongest daddy in the world, even though she can beat me at arm wrestling now." Charlotte found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in weeks. "You sound like you love being a father." "Best job I've ever had," Tyler said without hesitation. "Hardest too, but the best. Every day she teaches me something new. About what's important." "Like what?" Tyler considered the question seriously. "Like how sharing your last piece of candy makes it taste better than eating it alone. Like how saying I love you never gets old, no matter how many times you say it. Like how being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, it means you do the right thing anyway." Something in Charlotte's chest clenched at the simple wisdom of a father's love. She thought about her own father, a man who'd built an empire but had never learned how to build a relationship with his daughter. Richard Green measured success in stock prices and quarterly reports, not in bedtime stories and shared candy. "She sounds wonderful," Charlotte said. "She is. Sometimes I think about what kind of world she's going to inherit, and it scares me. But then I remember that as long as there are people willing to be kind to strangers, willing to help when it costs them something, maybe things will be okay." Tyler paused, stirring his soup thoughtfully. "Like tonight. You could have stayed closed off, kept your distance. But you're here, talking to me, letting me help. That gives me hope that Emma's going to grow up in a world where people still look out for each other." Charlotte felt tears threaten at the edges of her vision. Tyler had no idea how much his words meant to her, how desperately she needed to believe that genuine kindness still existed. For months, she'd been surrounded by people who saw her pregnancy as either an opportunity or a problem to be managed. Her father wanted her to marry Marcus Whitmore, the heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, to stabilize the situation. Her assistant wanted her to take maternity leave so he could position himself for her job. Her doctor wanted her to consider all her options given her unmarried status. But Tyler, this man who worked 2 jobs and gave away his only coat, saw her pregnancy as something beautiful, something to be celebrated and protected. He talked about her unborn daughter with the same fierce love he showed for Emma, as if all young people deserved to be treasured simply for existing. What about the baby's father? Tyler asked gently, that immediately held up his hand. Sorry. That's none of my business. You seem like you're handling this alone, and that's got to be hard. Charlotte's expression darkened. He's not in the picture. His choice, not mine. The bitterness in her voice told Tyler there was a story there, probably not a pleasant one. He'd seen enough of life to know that men sometimes ran when faced with responsibility, leaving women to carry burdens that should have been shared. I'm sorry, he said simply. His loss. Charlotte looked at Tyler with something approaching wonder. You really mean that? Of course I mean it. Look, I don't know your situation, but I know you're sitting here at midnight in a diner after being caught in the rain, and you're still worried about being polite and not eating too fast. You're growing a person inside you, and you're doing it with grace and strength. Any man who can't see that doesn't deserve you or your daughter. Tyler's fierce certainty, his absolute conviction that she was worth defending, broke something open in Charlotte's chest. For 6 months, she'd been told by everyone around her that her pregnancy was a complication, a scandal, a problem to be solved. Her father was embarrassed by the unmarried aspect. Marcus Whitmore had proposed not out of love, but out of what he called practical considerations. Her business partners worried about how her personal life would affect company image, but Tyler looked at her like she was exactly what the world needed more of, a woman brave enough to choose love over convenience, strong enough to face judgment, with dignity, wise enough to protect what mattered most. Thank you, she whispered, and Tyler could hear the tears she was holding back. For what? For making me feel human again. Tyler studied her face, seeing past the expensive clothes and careful composure to the scared, lonely woman underneath. Whatever Charlotte's story was, wherever she'd come from, she was running from something that had made her feel less than human. In his experience, that usually meant money, power, or family, sometimes all 3. You want to talk about it? He offered. Sometimes it helps to tell a stranger. No judgment, no agenda, just someone to listen. Charlotte looked around the quiet diner, at Dolores reading a magazine behind the counter, at the truck driver who'd fallen asleep over his book. This place existed in a bubble outside her normal world, where her name didn't matter and her bank account was irrelevant. For the first time in months, she could just be Charlotte, not Charlotte Green, CEO and heiress, but just a pregnant woman having soup with a kind man who'd given her his coat. It's complicated, she said finally. Most important things are. Tyler replied. But sometimes complicated situations need simple solutions, like kindness. Like someone willing to listen without trying to fix everything. Charlotte took a deep breath, tasting freedom in the simple act of being seen without expectation. Maybe it was time to tell someone the truth, not the sanitized version her publicist would approve, but the messy human reality of how she'd ended up alone in the rain, running from a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt like a prison from within. The words came slowly at first, like water finding its way through a dam that had been holding back too much pressure for too long. Charlotte wrapped her hands around her coffee mug and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper but growing stronger as Tyler listened without interrupting, without judging, without trying to solve problems she hadn't asked him to fix. Name is Charlotte Green, she said, watching his face for recognition. When none came, she felt both relief and a strange disappointment. 6 months ago, I was supposed to have my life completely figured out. I'm 31, I run a technology company that my father built, and everyone expects me to carry on the family legacy with perfect precision." Tyler nodded, recognizing the weight of other people's expectations, even if he couldn't relate to the scale of responsibility Charlotte was describing. "The baby's father is James Morrison," she continued. And this time Tyler's eyebrows rose slightly. Even someone who didn't follow business news had heard of Morrison Industries pharmaceuticals, medical devices, government contracts worth billions. We dated for 2 years. I thought we were building something real, but when I told him about the pregnancy, Charlotte's voice cracked, and she took a shaky sip of coffee before continuing. "He said it was inconvenient timing, that we should handle the situation quietly, so it wouldn't affect either of our company's stock prices. He offered to pay for everything, including my silence, but he made it clear that he wasn't interested in being a father." Tyler felt anger rise in his chest, not the explosive kind, but the cold, steady fury of someone who understood exactly how precious and rare it was to have a person choose to love you unconditionally. The idea that any man could look at Charlotte's pregnancy as a problem to be solved, rather than a miracle to be celebrated, made Tyler want to drive to wherever James Morrison lived and explain some fundamental truths about being a man. "I'm sorry," Tyler said, and Charlotte could hear the genuine anger on her behalf in his voice. "That's not how a decent person responds to that kind of news." "No, it's not," Charlotte agreed. "But it gets worse. My father, he's never been what you'd call emotionally available, but when he found out about the pregnancy and James's reaction, he saw it as a business opportunity. He arranged for Marcus Whitmore, another pharmaceutical heir, to propose to me. A merger wrapped up in a marriage proposal, designed to save face for everyone involved." Tyler stared at her. "An arranged marriage in 2023? "That's what I said. But my father explained it very logically. Marcus needed a wife with the right connections and business acumen. I needed a father for my baby and protection from scandal. Our companies would benefit from the alliance. Everyone wins. Except you," Tyler said quietly. "Except me," Charlotte confirmed. "Marcus is fine. He's educated, polite, wealthy, socially appropriate. He treats the whole thing like a business transaction, which I suppose it is. He's even said he's willing to raise the baby as his own, give her his name, provide for her future. But you don't love him." "I don't even like him," Charlotte said with a bitter laugh. "He talks about my daughter like she's a quarterly report. He's already making plans for her education, her social circle, her eventual marriage to another appropriate heir. She's not even born yet, and he's trying to program her entire life." Tyler thought about Emma, about the way her eyes lit up when she discovered something new, about the joy he found in letting her explore the world and choose her own interests. The idea of anyone trying to control a person's life from birth felt like a violation of everything sacred about parenthood. "So what happened tonight?" he asked. "Why were you sitting in the rain instead of safe at home?" "At home." Charlotte laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tonight was supposed to be the engagement party. 200 of the most influential people in the state gathered to celebrate the practical alliance between the Green and Whitmore families. I was supposed to stand there in a designer dress, smile for the cameras, and pretend to be grateful for the opportunity to trade my autonomy for social acceptability. She paused, her hand moving to her stomach in that protective gesture Tyler was beginning to recognize. I got dressed, did my hair, put on the jewelry my father's assistant selected. I looked in the mirror and saw exactly what everyone wanted me to be: the perfect daughter, the appropriate wife, the acceptable mother. But I couldn't recognize myself. "So you left?" "I left," Charlotte confirmed. "Right out the service entrance, still in my party dress and heels. I got in my car and started driving with no destination in mind. I ended up here because, I don't know why. Maybe because this is the kind of place where Charlotte Green doesn't exist. where I could just be anonymous for a while. Tyler looked at her expensive watch, her designer clothes, the careful way she'd been taught to hold herself. Even soaked by rain and exhausted by emotional turmoil, Charlotte carried herself like someone accustomed to boardrooms and galas. But underneath all that polish, Tyler could see the scared woman who'd run away from a life that was suffocating her. "Your father must be worried," Tyler said. "My father is probably furious," Charlotte corrected. "This will cost him politically and financially. Marcus's family will be insulted. The press will have a field day with the story of the runaway heiress. My company's stock will probably drop on Monday when the markets open." She said all this matter-of-factly, as if she were reading someone else's story from a newspaper. Tyler realized that Charlotte had been trained from birth to think about the broader implications of every personal decision, to weigh her individual happiness against corporate responsibility and family reputation. "What about what you want?" Tyler asked. "Forget about everyone else for a minute. What do you actually want for yourself and your daughter?" Charlotte stared at him as if he'd asked her to solve an impossible equation. I want to raise her to believe that her worth isn't tied to her usefulness to other people. I want her to know that love shouldn't be conditional on good behavior or appropriate choices. I want her to be brave enough to walk away from situations that don't honor who she is." Tyler smiled. "Those sound like the most important things any parent could want for their kid. But I don't know how to give her those things if I can't even claim them for myself," Charlotte said, frustrated tears threatening again. "I've been groomed since birth to prioritize everyone else's needs over my own. I don't even know what my own needs are anymore." Tyler was quiet for a moment, thinking about Emma and the conversations they'd had about making hard choices. "You know what my daughter taught me last month?" he said finally. She had this friend at school who was being mean to her, saying hurtful things about why her mom wasn't around. I asked Emma what she wanted to do about it, and she said, "Daddy, I want to be brave like you. When people are mean, you don't be mean back, but you also don't let them make you small." Charlotte felt her chest tighten with emotion. "Smart girl, the smartest. And you know what? You've already started being brave like that. You walked away from a situation that was making you small, even though it cost you everything that was supposed to be safe and secure. That takes more courage than most people have." Charlotte looked at Tyler through tears she could no longer hold back. Here was a man who worked 2 jobs to support his daughter, who'd given his coat to a stranger in the rain, who saw strength where everyone else saw scandal. He understood what it meant to choose love over security, to prioritize being authentic over being appropriate. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I have money, I have resources, but I don't have a single person in my life who would choose me over their own interests. I don't know how to raise a daughter in that kind of environment." Tyler reached across the table and gently touched her hand, the first physical contact they'd shared since he'd given her his coat. His fingers were calloused from work, warm from his coffee mug, completely steady despite the emotional weight of their conversation. "You're not in that environment anymore," he said quietly. "You walked away, remember? That means you get to choose what comes next." "I don't know how to choose," Charlotte said. "I've never had to make decisions based on what I actually want." "Then maybe," Tyler said, "you start small. What do you want right now in this moment?" Charlotte thought about it, looking around the simple diner with its cracked vinyl and fluorescent lights, at Tyler with his kind eyes and work-worn hands, at the life growing inside her that represented possibility instead of obligation. "I want to feel safe," she said finally. "I want to feel like someone sees me as a person instead of a problem to be managed. I want to believe that my daughter can grow up in a world where people still do kind things without expecting anything in return." Tyler smiled. "Well, you're safe here. Dolores won't let anything happen to you on her watch, and I'm not going anywhere until you figure out your next step. As for being seen, I see someone brave enough to walk away from a $1 billion empire because it wasn't worth sacrificing her soul. And your daughter? She's going to grow up knowing her mother chose love over money, authenticity over approval. That's the best gift any parent can give. Charlotte felt something shift inside her chest. Not a healing, not yet, but the beginning of hope. For the first time in months, she was sitting across from someone who didn't want anything from her except the opportunity to be kind. Tyler had given her his coat, bought her soup, listened to her story without trying to fix her life or judge her choices. More importantly, he'd shown her something she'd forgotten was possible. That goodness existed in the world without calculation. That kindness could be offered freely. That one person's choice to help could change everything. "Thank you," she said, squeezing his hand. "I mean that. For the coat, for the food, for listening, for helping me remember that there are still good people in the world." Tyler squeezed back gently. "You're good people too, Charlotte. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights like the world had been washed clean and given a chance to start over. Inside Tony's all-night diner, two strangers who'd found each other in the darkness began to discover that sometimes the most profound connections happen when you have nothing left to lose and everything still to gain. The night was far from over, but already both Tyler and Charlotte could sense that something fundamental had shifted. They'd each offered the other something precious: Tyler his coat and kindness, Charlotte her trust and authentic story. Neither of them knew yet how this encounter would change their lives, but they both knew they'd been given a gift that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with hope. The clock above the diner's counter had moved past 1:30 a.m., but neither Tyler nor Charlotte seemed to notice the passage of time. They'd settled into a rhythm of conversation that felt as natural as breathing, sharing stories, asking gentle questions, discovering the unexpected parallels in their seemingly different lives. Dolores had refilled their coffee cups twice and left a slice of apple pie on the house without being asked, recognizing the kind of conversation that needed fuel to sustain itself. Tyler found himself telling Charlotte things he'd never shared with anyone, not even Mrs. Patterson, about the night Rachel left, when he'd found Emma sitting in her closet afterward, clutching a photo of the three of them from happier times, about the panic attacks he'd had in those first weeks of single parenthood, standing in grocery store aisles overwhelmed by the responsibility of making every decision alone, about the way Emma sometimes looked at other families, complete ones, with a longing that broke his heart, even as he tried to convince himself he was enough. "The hardest part," Tyler said, stirring sugar into his third cup of coffee, "wasn't the money or the logistics. It was the fear that I was failing her just by being the only parent left standing. Rachel used to handle all the emotional stuff. Talks about feelings, the explanation of why other kids had things we couldn't afford. I'm good at fixing broken toys and making pancakes, but sometimes Emma needs more than that." Charlotte listened with the intensity of someone who understood the weight of loving someone more than yourself. "What does she need that you feel like you can't give her?" Tyler was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Security, I guess. Not just financial, though that would help, but the kind that comes from knowing your parent has everything figured out. I'm making it up as I go along, and sometimes I think she can tell." "Tyler," Charlotte said gently, "every parent is making it up as they go along. The difference is that some of them have enough money to hide their uncertainty behind private schools and nannies and trust funds. But Emma isn't missing out on love or attention, or someone who would do anything for her. Those are the things that actually matter. Tyler looked at her carefully. "You sound like you know something about parents who had everything figured out except the important stuff." Charlotte's expression grew distant, her fingers tracing patterns on the table's formica surface. "My father is Richard Green. Maybe you've heard of him. Green Industries, government contracts, technology development. Forbes puts his net worth somewhere around $8 billion, though the exact number fluctuates with the market. Tyler let out a low whistle. I definitely haven't heard of him, but $8 billion is a number I can't even really comprehend. Neither could I growing up, Charlotte said. It was just the backdrop of my life: private jets, houses in different countries, staff members whose job was to anticipate my needs before I even knew I had them. But my father. She paused, searching for words that would explain something she'd never fully understood herself. He's brilliant at building companies and terrible at building relationships. I spent most of my life trying to earn his approval by becoming exactly what he needed for his business empire. Tyler thought about Emma's artwork covering his refrigerator, about the way she ran to hug him when he got home from work, about bedtime stories and scraped knees and all the tiny moments that made up their relationship. Did he ever just enjoy you? Like, enjoy who you were as a person instead of what you could become? Charlotte felt tears threaten at this simple question. I don't think he knows how. When I was little, I used to put on these elaborate performances, singing, dancing, little plays I'd write myself. I thought if I was entertaining enough, talented enough, he'd want to spend time with me instead of working. But he'd always end up taking business calls in the middle of my shows, or he'd suggest ways I could improve my presentation skills for future networking opportunities. The pain in her voice made Tyler's chest ache. He tried to imagine Emma performing for his attention and being met with business advice instead of applause and hugs. The image was so wrong it made him physically uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Tyler said. Every kid deserves to have someone who lights up when they walk into the room. Emma has that, Charlotte observed. I can see it in the way you talk about her. She knows she's the most important thing in your world. She is, Tyler said without hesitation. Everything I do is measured against whether it's good for her. Every job I take, every decision I make, every sacrifice I'm willing to accept. It all comes down to giving her the best life I can manage. Charlotte found herself envying Emma in a way that surprised her. Not for the modest apartment or thrift store clothes, or the financial uncertainty that shadowed Tyler's every decision, but for the absolute certainty that she was loved unconditionally. Charlotte had grown up with every material advantage, but had never experienced the security of knowing someone would choose her happiness over their own convenience. The baby's father, Charlotte said suddenly, James Morrison, he reminds me of my father in some ways. Brilliant, successful, completely convinced that emotions are inefficient obstacles to optimal outcomes. When I told him about the pregnancy, his first question was about how it would affect his company's merger timeline. Tyler felt that cold anger rise again, but he kept his voice steady. What was your first feeling when you found out you were pregnant? Charlotte smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Tyler had seen from her all night. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. I was in my office, and I just sat there looking at the test, thinking about this little person who was going to depend on me for everything. I imagined teaching her things, watching her discover the world, being the kind of mother who sees her daughter as a miracle instead of a responsibility. That's exactly how it should feel, Tyler said firmly. Emma wasn't planned Rachel, and I were young and broke and had no idea what we were doing. But the moment I held her for the first time, I understood why people write songs about love. It's like your heart suddenly exists outside your body, walking around in the world, and your only job is to protect it and help it grow. Charlotte placed her hand on her stomach, feeling the subtle movements of her daughter responding to the emotional intensity of the conversation. I want her to know that feeling. I want her to grow up believing she's cherished, not because of what she can do or who she might become, but just because she exists. She will, Tyler said with quiet conviction. You walked away from billions of dollars to protect that possibility. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of mother you're going to be. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling between them like a warm blanket. Outside, the streets were still empty except for the occasional late-night delivery truck or early morning commuter beginning their day. Inside the diner, Tyler and Charlotte existed in a bubble of honesty and connection that felt removed from the complications of their normal lives. "Can I ask you something personal?" Charlotte said. Tyler almost laughed. "After everything we've talked about tonight, I think we're past the point of worrying about personal boundaries." When Rachel left, Charlotte continued carefully, "Were you angry?" Tyler considered the question, remembering those early days of shock and betrayal and overwhelming responsibility. "At first, yes. I was furious that she could abandon Emma, that she could walk away from our family like it meant nothing. But anger takes energy, and I needed all my energy for Emma. Eventually, I realized I was angrier at the situation than at Rachel herself." "What do you mean?" "I think Rachel left because she was scared and overwhelmed and didn't know how to ask for help. I was working so much, trying to keep us afloat financially, that I didn't see how isolated she was becoming. We were both drowning, but we were drowning separately." Tyler paused, his voice growing softer. "I'm not excusing what she did. Emma deserved better than being abandoned. But I understand it now in a way I couldn't then." Charlotte absorbed this, thinking about her own patterns of running when situations became too complex or emotionally demanding. "Do you think she regrets it?" "I hope so," Tyler said honestly. "Not because I want her to suffer, but because Emma is an incredible human being and missing out on knowing her is the biggest loss anyone could experience. But whether Rachel regrets it or not doesn't change anything for us. Emma and I had to build our life without her, and we've built something good. Do you think you'll ever trust someone enough to let them into that life?" Charlotte asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that's too personal." Tyler smiled. "It's okay. The answer is, I don't know. For a long time, I thought my job was to focus entirely on Emma, to make sure she had everything she needed from me before I even considered what I might want for myself. But lately, I've been wondering if that's actually the best thing for her. Maybe she needs to see that it's possible to build loving relationships, that not everyone leaves when things get difficult." Charlotte felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby's movements. What would that look like? Someone coming into your life? Tyler was quiet for a long moment, studying Charlotte's face in the fluorescent light. She was still wearing his coat. Her hair had dried into gentle waves, and the exhaustion and fear from earlier had been replaced by something that looked like hope mixed with possibility. "I think," Tyler said carefully, "it would have to be someone who understood that Emma comes first, always. Someone who could love her not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Someone who understood that we're a package deal, and that family isn't always about blood sometimes. It's about choosing to show up for each other every day." Charlotte felt tears threaten again, but this time they weren't tears of sadness or fear. "That sounds beautiful. What about you?" Tyler asked. "After everything with James and your father and the arranged marriage, do you think you'll ever trust someone with your heart again?" Charlotte looked down at her hands, thinking about the walls she'd built around herself, the careful distance she maintained from everyone who claimed to care about her. "I want to believe it's possible. I want my daughter to see me in a relationship that's based on mutual respect and genuine affection instead of strategic advantage. But I don't know how to tell the difference anymore between someone who sees me and someone who sees what I can do for them." Tyler reached across the table and gently covered her hand with his. "You'll know," he said quietly. "It's the difference between someone who makes you feel like you need to perform and someone who makes you feel like you can just breathe." Charlotte looked at their joined hands, his calloused from work, hers soft from a lifetime of privilege, and realized that for the past 3 hours, she'd been breathing more easily than she had in months. Tyler hadn't asked her for anything. hadn't tried to fix her situation or offer advice about her family drama. He'd simply listened, understood, and made her feel like the person she was in this moment was exactly the person she was supposed to be. "Tyler," she said softly, "what you did tonight, giving me your coat, buying me food, listening to my story, why did you do all that? You don't know me, you have your own problems to worry about, and helping me probably cost you money. You don't have to spare." To spare. Tyler smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "My grandfather used to say that we're all just walking each other home in the dark. Sometimes you're the one who needs help finding your way, and sometimes you're the one with the flashlight. Tonight, I had the flashlight. Tomorrow, maybe I'll be the one who's lost." Charlotte felt something crack open in her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the coffee or the diner's heating system. Here was a man who understood that kindness wasn't a transaction, that helping others was simply what human beings did for each other when they remembered they were all part of the same fragile, beautiful experiment of being alive. "What if?" Charlotte said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if tonight changed everything? What if we both ended up being exactly the person the other one needed to meet?" Tyler studied her face, seeing the vulnerability and hope and fear all mixed together in her expression. He thought about Emma, about the life they'd built together, about the careful balance he'd maintained between being grateful for what they had and wanting something more. He thought about Charlotte's story, about her courage in walking away from everything safe and familiar, about the way she'd trusted him with her truth. "Then," Tyler said, squeezing her hand gently, "I'd say we're both very lucky people." The conversation had reached a depth that surprised them both, moving past the exchange of stories into something that felt like the recognition of kindred spirits. Dolores had switched on the diner's ancient radio, and soft jazz music filled the space between their words, creating an atmosphere of intimacy that made their corner booth feel like a world unto itself. Charlotte found herself studying Tyler's hands as he spoke, the way his fingers curved around his coffee mug, the small scar on his knuckle from some long-ago accident, the careful way he moved as if he were used to handling delicate things. These were working hands, practical hands, but they were also gentle in a way that made her think of her unborn daughter being held safely, being protected and cherished. "I need to ask you something," Charlotte said, her voice carrying a weight. That made Tyler look up from his coffee. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay," Tyler said simply, giving her his full attention. "Do you think I'm crazy for walking away tonight? Not just from the engagement party, but from all of it, the security, the money, the predetermined life that would have solved all my practical problems." Tyler was quiet for a long moment, not because he didn't know his answer, but because he wanted to give her the honest response she'd asked for, not just the supportive one she might have wanted to hear. "I think," he said finally, "that you're the sanest person in your entire situation. Everyone else was treating your life like a business transaction, but you remembered that it's actually your life. That takes courage most people never have to find." Charlotte felt relief flood through her, followed immediately by a new kind of fear. "But what if I can't figure out how to build something better? What if I've been so protected and managed my entire life that I don't actually know how to make real decisions for myself?" Tyler leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Charlotte, in the past 6 hours, you've made more real decisions than most people make in 6 months. You chose to leave a situation that was suffocating you, even though it meant giving up everything that was supposed to keep you safe. You chose to trust a stranger with your story. You chose to prioritize your daughter's future over everyone else's expectations. Those aren't the choices of someone who doesn't know how to make decisions. Those are the choices of someone who's finally free to make decisions that matter." Charlotte stared at him, feeling something shift inside her chest like tectonic plates. Finding a new alignment. "No one has ever talked to me like that before," Like what? Like my thoughts and feelings are just valid. Like I don't need to justify them or prove they're logical or demonstrate their value to anyone else. Like my instincts about my own life might actually be trustworthy. Tyler felt a surge of protective anger toward every person who had ever made Charlotte feel like her inner wisdom was less reliable than their external advice. Your instincts brought you here tonight, didn't they? Away from a situation that would have made you miserable and toward this conversation. That seems pretty trustworthy to me. Charlotte laughed, and Tyler realized it was the first time all night he'd heard her laugh without sadness threading through it. This conversation is definitely not what I expected when I ran away from my engagement party. What did you expect, honestly? I thought I'd drive around for a few hours, maybe sit in my car and cry, then eventually go home and apologize to everyone for my momentary lapse in judgment. I thought I'd end up married to Marcus by Christmas, and spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to choose differently. Tyler shook his head. You were brave enough. You are brave enough. I don't feel brave, Charlotte admitted. One feel terrified. I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm about to be responsible for another human being who's going to depend on me to have my life figured out. Can I tell you a secret? Tyler said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. I've been Emma's father for 8 years, and I still have no idea what I'm doing most of the time. Last month, she asked me why people fall in love, and I spent 20 minutes explaining the biological chemistry of attraction before I realized she just wanted to know why grown-ups sometimes act silly around each other. Charlotte giggled, a sound so spontaneous and genuine that it transformed her entire face. What did you tell her? That love makes people want to take care of each other, even when it's inconvenient. That it makes you want to share your favorite things and protect someone else's happiness, even when it costs you something. That it's the feeling of finding someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself. Charlotte felt her breath catch. That's beautiful. Did she understand it? She said it sounded like how she feels about our neighbor's cat. She wants to make sure it's always safe and happy, even though it's not technically her responsibility. Tyler grinned. 8-year-olds have a way of cutting straight to the truth. She sounds incredible, Charlotte said softly. I hope my daughter grows up with that kind of clarity about what matters. She will, if you keep making choices based on love instead of fear, Tyler said. That's the difference between you and your father, between you and James Morrison, between you and everyone who tried to convince you to marry Marcus. They make decisions based on protecting what they have. You're making decisions based on creating what you want. Charlotte stared at him, feeling like he'd just handed her a map to a country she'd been trying to reach her entire life. Is that really what I'm doing? What does it feel like you're doing? Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment, checking in with herself in a way she'd been taught was self-indulgent, but now felt essential. It feels like I'm finally listening to a voice I've been ignoring for years. Like I'm remembering who I used to be before I learned to be who everyone else needed. When she opened her eyes, Tyler was watching her with an expression of such gentle understanding that she felt tears threaten again. Who were you before? He asked quietly. Curious, Charlotte said immediately. I used to ask questions about everything, why people made the choices they made, how things worked, what would happen if we tried something different. My father called it being disruptive, but really I just wanted to understand the world instead of just accepting it. What else? Generous, Charlotte continued, surprising herself with how quickly the answers came. I used to give away my toys to kids who didn't have as many, even when my nanny said it wasn't appropriate. I wanted everyone to have enough of everything, Tyler smiled. Curious and generous. Those are pretty great qualities to rediscover. What about you? Charlotte asked. Who were you before life got so complicated? Tyler thought about it, remembering the young man who'd married Rachel with such optimism, who'd believed that love and hard work could overcome any obstacle. Hopeful, he said finally. I used to believe that good things happened to people who deserved them, that effort was always rewarded, that love was enough to solve most problems. Do you still believe that? Some of it, Tyler said honestly. I've learned that effort isn't always rewarded the way you expect, and that love alone can't solve everything. But I still believe in hope. I have to, for Emma's sake. If I stop believing that tomorrow could be better than today, what kind of world am I raising her to inherit? Charlotte felt something powerful stir in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than shared experiences or compatible perspectives. Tyler understood hope the way she was beginning to understand courage, not as the absence of fear or doubt, but as the decision to keep moving forward anyway. Tyler, she said, her voice carrying a weight that made him look up sharply, I want you to know that meeting you tonight has changed something fundamental for me. Not just about my situation or my choices, but about what I believe is possible between people. Tyler felt his heart rate pick up, but he kept his voice steady. What do you mean? You mean? I mean that I've spent my entire adult life around people who see me as an asset or an opportunity or a problem to be managed. Even James, who I thought loved me, saw our relationship as one element in his broader life strategy. But you, she paused, searching for words that could contain the enormity of what she was feeling. You see me as just a person worth helping. You've given me your coat and your time and your attention without trying to get anything back from me. You've made me remember what it feels like to be treated like I matter simply because I exist. Tyler reached across the table and took her hand again, but this time the gesture felt different, less about offering comfort and more about acknowledging a connection that had grown beyond the circumstances that brought them together. Charlotte, he said quietly, you do matter. Not because of your money or your company or what you can do for other people, but because you're kind and brave and genuine in a world that doesn't always reward those qualities. Any man who can't see that doesn't deserve access to who you really are. Charlotte felt tears spill over, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of recognition, of being seen completely for the first time in her adult life. What if I told you that sitting here with you tonight has been the most real I've felt in years? What if I told you that the way you talk about Emma, the way you've treated me, the way you move through the world, it's shown me what I want my life to actually look like? Tyler felt something profound shift in his chest, a door opening to possibilities he'd thought were closed forever. What would that life look like? It would look like choosing love over convenience every single time, Charlotte said, her voice gaining strength. It would look like raising my daughter to believe that her worth isn't negotiable, that kindness is the most important currency, that family is about showing up for each other instead of just sharing DNA. She paused, looking directly into Tyler's eyes. It would look like finding someone who makes me want to be brave enough to deserve the love they're offering. Tyler felt his breath catch. Charlotte, I know this is crazy, she continued, her words coming faster now as if she were afraid she'd lose her courage if she slowed down. I know we just met. I know I'm pregnant with another man's baby. I know my life is complicated in ways that would scare any reasonable person away. But Tyler, what if this isn't coincidence? What if this is exactly what we're both supposed to find? Tyler studied her face, the hope and fear and vulnerability all mixed together. The way she was offering him her heart, despite every logical reason to protect it. He thought about Emma, about the questions she'd started asking about love and family, and whether they'd ever be anything more than just the two of them. He thought about the careful, safe life he'd built and the way Charlotte's presence had reminded him that safety wasn't the same thing as happiness. What are you asking me? Tyler said softly. I'm asking if you believe that sometimes the universe puts people exactly where they need to be, Charlotte said. I'm asking if you think two people can meet at the worst possible moment and discover it's actually the most perfect timing in the world. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, feeling the weight of the decision point they'd reached. Everything rational told him this was moving too fast, that he should be cautious, that he had Emma to think about and couldn't afford to make impulsive choices about their future. But everything in his heart told him that Charlotte wasn't an impulsive choice. She was the answer to prayers he'd been afraid to voice. "I think," Tyler said finally, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to say, "that I've been waiting my entire life to meet someone who makes me want to be brave enough to believe in love again. And I think that if you're willing to trust me with your heart and your daughter's future, I'd like to spend whatever time you'll give me proving that I'm worth that trust." Charlotte felt her world realign around this moment, around the choice to step into something uncertain but beautiful with a man who'd shown her what authentic love looked like. "Tyler," she whispered, "I think I'm falling in love with you." "I think," Tyler replied, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles, "I'm already there." The radio in Tony's all-night diner had moved through jazz into early morning talk radio by the time Tyler and Charlotte realized that the world outside their booth was beginning to change. The sky visible through the diner's windows had shifted from black to deep purple, the earliest hint that dawn was approaching and their night of suspended reality would soon collide with the demands of actual life. Dolores approached their table with the coffee pot and a knowing smile. "You two have been here for 5 hours, she observed, not unkindly. "That's either the beginning of something beautiful or the end of something complicated." Tyler and Charlotte exchanged a look that held the weight of everything they'd shared. The stories, the connection, the tentative admission of feelings that felt both inevitable and impossible. "Both maybe," Charlotte said softly. Dolores nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Well, the morning shift comes in at 6, and Tony likes to pretend he doesn't approve of my all-night counseling sessions. You might want to figure out your next move before the breakfast crowd shows up and ruins all this romantic atmosphere." She gestured around the fluorescent-lit diner with its cracked vinyl and faded posters, and somehow made it sound like the most romantic place on earth. Tyler supposed that in a way, it was at least for them. At least for tonight. After Dolores walked away, Charlotte and Tyler sat in silence for several minutes, both of them feeling the pressure of transition, of needing to make decisions about what came next. The emotions were real, the connection was undeniable, but they were still essentially strangers who'd found each other in crisis. The practical questions that had been suspended in the magic of honest conversation were beginning to reassert themselves. "Tyler," Charlotte said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think about it carefully before you answer." "Okay," Tyler said, though something in her tone made him brace for difficult honesty. "What I told you tonight about my situation, running away from my engagement, being pregnant with a billionaire's baby, having basically no relationship with my family, that's all true. But there are other truths I haven't told you yet, practical ones that you need to understand before this goes any further." Tyler waited, recognizing that Charlotte was trying to give him an opportunity to walk away before he was in too deep to change his mind. "My father is going to be furious about tonight," Charlotte continued. "Not just disappointed or embarrassed, actually. Furious. He spent months setting up this alliance with the Whitmore family, and my disappearance will have cost him financially and politically. He's not going to just accept that I've changed my mind about my life." Tyler frowned. "What does that mean practically?" "It means he'll probably try to control my access to my trust fund, maybe challenge my position at the company. It means there will be lawyers and media attention, and people trying to pressure me back into line. It means that anyone associated with me is going to become a target for that pressure." Charlotte paused, looking directly at Tyler. "It means that if you choose to be part of my life, you and Emma could end up dealing with private investigators, reporters, maybe even threats from people who think you're taking advantage of me financially." Tyler absorbed this information, thinking about Emma's quiet life, her school, Their neighbors who minded their own business and let them exist in peaceful anonymity. The idea of subjecting his daughter to the kind of scrutiny that followed wealthy families made his stomach clench. "There's more," Charlotte said, seeing his expression. "James Morrison isn't going to just disappear because I've moved on. He's going to be my daughter's biological father forever, which means he'll always have a claim to some involvement in her life if he chooses to pursue it. And my money, even if my father tries to cut me off, I have assets and investments that make me independently wealthy. That's going to change the dynamic of any relationship I have, whether I want it to or not." Tyler was quiet for a long moment, processing the full scope of what Charlotte was telling him. The woman sitting across from him wasn't just someone who'd run away from an engagement. She was someone whose personal choices would have ripple effects through business empires and social hierarchies he couldn't even imagine. "Why are you telling me this?" Tyler asked. "I mean, I appreciate the honesty, but why now?" Charlotte's eyes filled with tears she was trying not to shed. "Because what I feel for you is real, Tyler. This connection, this feeling like I found someone who sees me for who I actually am. It's the most genuine thing that's happened to me in years. But I can't ask you to take on my complications without being completely honest about what those complications actually involve." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara that had somehow survived the rain and the emotional conversations. "I'm giving you a chance to walk away while you still can. Before you're in too deep, before Emma gets attached to the idea of me being part of your lives, before my world crashes into yours and changes everything you've worked so hard to build." Tyler studied Charlotte's face, seeing the fear and hope warring in her expression. She was offering him an escape route, but she was also trusting him with the complete truth about what choosing her would mean. The generosity of that trust, the courage it took to risk losing him by being completely honest, told Tyler everything he needed to know about Charlotte's character. "Can I ask you something now?" Tyler said. Charlotte nodded, bracing herself. "Do you want me to walk away?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Charlotte felt her breath catch because the honest answer was complicated in ways she was still discovering. "Part of me does," she admitted. "The part of me that's been trained to protect other people from the consequences of my choices. The part that thinks love should be convenient and easy and not require anyone to sacrifice the life they've already built." Tyler waited, sensing there was more. "But the part of me that's been hiding in fear for the past 6 months, the part that walked away from billions of dollars because they came with strings attached to my soul, that part of me is begging you not to leave. That part of me thinks that maybe the complications are worth it if it means I get to build something real with someone who makes me remember who I want to be." Charlotte looked down at her hands, then back up at Tyler with an expression of raw vulnerability. "I've never had anyone in my life who chose me just because they wanted to. Everyone else has stayed because I was useful or profitable or socially advantageous. You're the first person who might choose me just because you love me, and the first person I'm terrified of losing for the same reason." Tyler reached across the table and took both of her hands in his, holding them steady while he spoke. "Charlotte, I'm not going to lie and say the complications don't scare me. I've spent the last 2 years building a stable life for Emma, and the idea of bringing chaos into that stability makes me want to protect her from anything that might hurt her." Charlotte felt her heart start to break, preparing herself for the gentle rejection she'd been expecting. "But," Tyler continued, "I've also spent 2 years being careful and safe, and making sure Emma and I never took any risks that might cost us what we had. And you know what? She's 8 years old, and she's never seen me truly happy. She's never seen me in love or watched me build something beautiful with another person. Maybe it's time for both of us to be brave enough to believe that some things are worth the risk." Charlotte stared at him, afraid to hope. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you're not the only one who's been hiding," Tyler said. I've been hiding behind being a good father, using Emma as an excuse not to want anything for myself. But meeting you has reminded me that maybe the best thing I can give her is the example of choosing love, even when it's complicated, of building a family based on caring for each other instead of just surviving together. Tyler paused, squeezing her hands gently. I'm saying that I'd rather face whatever complications come with loving you than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have built together. Charlotte felt tears of relief and joy spill over. Tyler, are you sure? Because once we cross this line, once we decide to really try this, I can't protect you from what comes next. My life is about to become very public and very complicated, and I don't know how to navigate it any better than you do. Tyler smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. Then we'll figure it out together. Emma's taught me that the best adventures are the ones where you don't know the ending yet. Charlotte laughed through her tears. This is either the bravest thing either of us has ever done, or the most foolish. Maybe both, Tyler agreed. But I think I'm okay with that. Outside the diner windows, the sky had lightened to pale gray, and the first commuters were beginning to appear on the streets. The night that had brought them together was ending, but something new was beginning, something that felt fragile and precious and full of possibility. So what happens now? Charlotte asked. Practically, I mean. I can't go back to my father's house, and I'm guessing you need to get home to Emma soon. Tyler checked his watch. 5:47 a.m., Mrs. Patterson would be up in an hour, expecting him to pick up Emma before she left for school. His cleaning shift had been completely missed, and he'd probably lost that job. But looking at Charlotte's hopeful face, he found he couldn't bring himself to regret the choice. I need to go home and explain to Emma that Daddy met someone special, Tyler said. I need to tell Mrs. Patterson that our life might be about to change in ways we can't predict yet. And I need to figure out how to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. Charlotte nodded. And I need to find somewhere to stay while I figure out my next steps. I need to call my lawyer and probably a security firm and maybe a therapist who specializes in wealthy family dysfunction. They both laughed at the absurdity of their respective to-do lists, but underneath the humor was the recognition that they were about to step into uncharted territory together. Charlotte, Tyler said seriously, I want you to know that whatever happens next, tonight mattered. Meeting you, talking with you, remembering what it feels like to connect with someone who sees the world the way I do, that's changed something in me that I don't think can be unchanged. Charlotte felt her heart swell with gratitude and affection, and the beginning of something that might just be love. For me too, she said softly. You've reminded me that I don't have to earn love by being useful to someone. You've shown me what it looks like when someone chooses to care about you just because you're you. Tyler stood up and held out his hand. Come on, he said. Let me drive you somewhere safe. We can figure out the rest later, but right now, let's just make sure you're okay. Charlotte took his hand and stood, still wearing his coat, still feeling the warmth of belonging to someone who had chosen her freely. Whatever came next, whether it was media attention, or family pressure, or the complicated logistics of blending their very different worlds, they would face it together. As they walked toward the diner's exit, Dolores called out from behind the counter. You two come back when you've got something to celebrate, she said with a knowing wink. First coffee's on the house for true love. Tyler and Charlotte exchanged a look of shared amusement and possibility, and stepped out into the early morning, light to begin writing the next chapter of their story together. 3 days after the night that changed everything, Tyler stood in the kitchen of their small apartment, making Emma's breakfast while she got ready for school. The morning routine was the same as always: scrambled eggs, toast cut into triangles the way she liked, orange juice in her favorite cup with the cartoon unicorn. But everything felt different. Tyler moved with a lightness he hadn't experienced in years, humming softly as he flipped the eggs, checking his phone for the third time to see if Charlotte had texted. "Daddy, you're acting weird," Emma announced, appearing in the doorway with her backpack already slung over her shoulder and her hair in the slightly crooked ponytail that meant she'd tried to do it herself. "Weird how?" Tyler asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. He'd been smiling at random moments, staring out windows with a dreamy expression. And yesterday he'd started whistling while doing laundry, something Emma had never heard him do in her entire 8 years of life. "Weird like happy," Emma said, climbing onto her chair at the small kitchen table. "Like really happy. Not just pretending dash to dash be dash happy dash, so dash I dash don single quotes to dash worry happy." Tyler felt his chest tighten with a mixture of love and guilt. Had he really been pretending for so long that Emma could tell the difference? He sat down across from her, suddenly understanding that this conversation was going to be more important than he'd anticipated. "Emma," Tyler said carefully, "what if I told you that sometimes grown-ups meet people who make them remember what real happiness feels like?" Emma paused with her fork halfway to her mouth, studying her father's face with the intense focus she usually reserved for her most challenging math problems. "Did you meet someone, Daddy?" Tyler smiled, marveling at how his daughter could cut straight to the heart of any situation. "I did meet someone. Her name is Charlotte and she's special." "Special how? Like she has superpowers?" "Special like she makes me want to be the best version of myself," Tyler said, remembering his conversation with Charlotte about explaining love to children. "Special like talking to her feels like coming home." Emma considered this seriously, while taking another bite of eggs. "Is she going to be my new mommy?" The directness of the question caught Tyler off guard, but he realized he should have expected it. Emma had been asking about family structure for months, wondering why some kids had 2 parents and others didn't, whether their family would ever grow beyond just the 2 of them. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," Tyler said honestly. "Charlotte and I are still getting to know each other. But if we decide we want to be a family together, you would be the most important part of that decision. Nothing happens unless you're okay with it." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Can I meet her? Do you want to meet her?" "Yeah. I want to see if she's good enough for you." Tyler nearly choked on his coffee. "Good enough for me? For me?" Mrs. Patterson says that when someone wants to join our family, they have to pass the Emma test first." Emma grinned with the confidence of someone who took her responsibilities seriously. "I have to make sure they're nice to you, and that they like reading stories, and that they won't try to change how we do things." Tyler felt tears threaten at the casual way Emma had said our family, at the protective instinct she was showing toward their life together. What if Charlotte has some ideas about how to make our life even better? Would that be okay? Like what kind of ideas? Tyler thought about Charlotte's resources, about the financial security she could provide, about the opportunities that might open up for Emma's education and future. But he also thought about simpler things, having someone to help with homework and bedtime stories, having someone to share the daily joys and worries of parenting, giving Emma an example of what healthy love looked like. Like maybe having someone else who thinks you're the most amazing kid in the world, Tyler said. Someone who wants to hear about your day and help with your science projects and make sure you know you're loved. Emma's expression grew thoughtful. Does she already have kids? She's going to have a baby girl soon, Tyler said carefully. So if Charlotte becomes part of our family, you might get to be a big sister. Emma's eyes went wide with excitement. Really? A baby sister? Tyler laughed at her enthusiasm. Maybe, but remember, this is all still very new. Charlotte and I are taking things slowly to make sure we're making good decisions for everyone. Okay, but Daddy? Emma said, finishing her breakfast and preparing to leave for school. You look really happy when you talk about her. Like happier than I've seen you in forever. So maybe she's already good for you, even if I haven't met her yet. After Emma left for school, Tyler found himself staring at his phone, debating whether to call Charlotte or wait for her to contact him first. He'd lost his cleaning job as expected, but instead of the usual panic about money, he felt an odd sense of possibility. Meeting Charlotte had reminded him that his life didn't have to be just about survival. It could be about building something beautiful. His phone rang, just as he was finishing the breakfast dishes. Charlotte's name appeared on the screen, and Tyler felt his heart rate pick up. "Good morning," he said, unable to keep the smile out of his voice. "Good morning," Charlotte replied, and Tyler could hear that she was smiling too. "How did it go with Emma?" "Better than I expected. She wants to meet you so she can determine if you're good enough for me." Charlotte laughed, a sound that was becoming Tyler's favorite thing in the world. "I like her already. What about you? How are you feeling about everything in the light of day?" Tyler considered the question seriously. 3 days ago, if someone had told him he'd be falling in love with a pregnant billionaire heiress who was hiding from her powerful family, he'd have suggested they seek professional help. Now, the complications that should have terrified him felt like adventures he wanted to face with Charlotte by his side. "I'm feeling like I want to see you again," Tyler said honestly. "I'm feeling like Emma and I have been living in a very small world, and maybe it's time to see what else is possible." "Good," Charlotte said, and Tyler could hear relief in her voice. "Because I've spent the last 3 days handling lawyers and family drama and media inquiries, and the only thing that's kept me sane is knowing that at the end of all this chaos, I get to talk to you." Tyler felt a surge of protectiveness. "Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help?" "Actually," Charlotte said, "there is something. Would you be willing to have dinner with me tonight? Somewhere quiet where we can talk about what comes next. I have some ideas about how we might be able to make this work, even with all the complications." Tyler smiled, feeling that same sense of possibility that had been growing stronger each day since their night at the diner. "I'd love that. Emma's staying with Mrs. Patterson tonight. Anyway, she's been asking when she can have another sleepover." "Perfect." "Tyler, yeah? Thank you for not running away when things got complicated. Thank you for giving me something worth staying for." As Tyler hung up the phone and prepared to face the day, he realized that for the first time in years, he was looking forward to the future instead of just trying to survive the present. Meeting Charlotte hadn't solved all his problems, but it had reminded him that problems were just obstacles on the way to something better, not permanent conditions he had to accept. Meanwhile, across town in her temporary suite at the Millbrook Grand Hotel, Charlotte was discovering her own version of transformation. The woman who had run away from her engagement party was learning to stand her ground in ways she'd never imagined possible. 6 months later, Tyler stood outside Tony's all-night diner holding Emma's hand while Charlotte adjusted baby Grace in her carrier. The same neon sign flickered overhead, the same cracked sidewalk stretched beneath their feet, but everything else had transformed in ways none of them could have imagined that rainy October night when two strangers found each other in the darkness. "This is where Daddy met Charlotte," Emma explained to her baby sister with the authority of someone who'd heard the story dozens of times. "She was sad and cold, and Daddy gave her his coat, and then they fell in love like in the movies." Charlotte smiled, remembering how that night had felt like the end of everything she'd known. Now watching Tyler help Emma navigate the diner's entrance while carefully holding the door for other customers, she realized it had actually been the beginning of everything she'd been searching for without knowing how to name it. Dolores looked up from behind the counter and grinned when she saw them. "Well, if it isn't my favorite success story. Come to show off that beautiful baby." They settled into their old booth, the same cracked vinyl seats where they'd first shared their stories. But now Emma sat next to Charlotte, carefully helping hold Grace's bottle while chattering about her new role as big sister. Tyler watched his family with an expression of quiet amazement, still sometimes unable to believe that all of this was real. "The community center is almost finished," Charlotte told Dolores as the older woman refilled their coffee cups. "We'll be able to start the job training programs next month." The Millbrook Community Resource Center had been Charlotte's idea, but it had become their shared mission. Using her resources and Tyler's understanding of what working families actually needed, they'd created something unprecedented in their industrial neighborhood, a place where people could get job training, educational support, and emergency assistance without judgment or complicated bureaucracy. Tyler had left Brookstone Manufacturing to become the center's director, a job that paid well enough to support their growing family while allowing him to help other people navigate the kinds of challenges he'd faced as a single parent. Charlotte had stepped back from green industries to focus on family and community work, finally using her wealth in ways that aligned with her values instead of her father's expectations. "And the scholarship program?" Dolores asked, because she'd been following their progress with the pride of someone who'd witnessed their beginning. 15 kids going to college next year," Emma announced, because she'd been helping Tyler organize the application files. "And 12 grown-ups are learning computers so they can get better jobs." Charlotte felt grace stir against her chest and adjusted the baby's position with practiced ease. Motherhood had been everything she'd hoped and more challenging than she'd expected, but having Tyler as a partner had made all the difference. He'd been there for every midnight feeding, every doctor's appointment, every moment of doubt about whether she was doing any of it right. "You know what I love most about this place?" Tyler said, looking around the diner that had witnessed their first connection. "It's still exactly the same. Same menu, same worn-out booths, same kindness. Some things don't need to change," Dolores agreed. "They just need to be appreciated." As they prepared to leave, a young woman at the counter caught Tyler's attention. She was alone, obviously exhausted, counting coins to pay for a cup of coffee she couldn't quite afford. Tyler recognized something familiar in her posture, the careful way people hold themselves when they're trying not to ask for help they desperately need. Without hesitation, Tyler walked over and quietly handed Dolores a $20 bill. "Whatever she needs," he said softly. "And if she wants to talk, tell her there are people who understand." Charlotte watched this exchange with the same warmth she'd felt that first night, recognizing the man who'd given his coat to a stranger and built his entire life around the principle that kindness was never wasted. Grace gurgled contentedly in her arms, and Emma reached for her hand with the unself-conscious affection of a person who'd never doubted she was loved. Walking to their car under the streetlights of Industrial and Fifth, Charlotte realized that the life she'd run to that rainy night had exceeded every dream she'd been afraid to voice. She had a partner who chose her every day, children who were growing up knowing they were treasured, and work that made a difference in their community. "Tyler," she said as he buckled Emma into her car seat, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if it hadn't been raining that night? If I hadn't needed your coat?" Tyler smiled, the same gentle expression that had first made Charlotte feel safe. "I think we would have found each other eventually. People who are meant to be together always do." As they drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, past the community center they'd built together, and the apartment complex where Tyler had once lived paycheck to paycheck, Charlotte understood that some stories don't end. They just keep getting better. Behind them, in Tony's all-night diner, Dolores was already talking to the young woman at the counter, offering soup and hope in equal measure, continuing the chain of kindness that had started with a coat given freely on a cold night, when two people discovered that love was always worth the risk. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.